This
regroup?
conference will now be recorded.
How do you regroup and move forward? And since the recording is just starting, I'll say again, welcome to the Oregon Alliance to Prevent Suicide Quarterly Regional Coalition meeting. Next slide, please. I wanted to take a moment to ground us in actually the vision that members of the Oregon Alliance hold out for youth in our state. So everyone can kind of take a breath and listen to this. We are imagining a time when in Oregon, all young people have hope, feel safe asking for help, can find access to the right help at the right time to prevent suicide, and live in communities that foster healing, connection, and wellness. I like imagining that world. And we really want our messaging moving forward to help create that vision for other people as well. I also want to remind folks that when we talk about suicide, we are often in a room with many people who have either struggled themselves with thoughts of suicide or have lost someone to suicide. And that as we tell our stories, we want to be sure that what we're doing is helping and healing and supporting people in their journey rather than triggering and traumatizing. And that's a little bit of a challenging dance to do sometimes. And so a lot of our discussion today is around how do we frame our messages using that kind of framework and thinking. Next slide, please. As many of you know, the core messages of the Oregon Alliance are to promote a sense of hope, using that kind of, it sounds like we're getting somebody's coming through on the mic. Yeah. So our core messages are promoting a sense of hope and highlighting stories of resilience and strategies of resilience. And I think I've been hearing some really interesting challenges around the word resilience particularly from some Black and Brown communities who feel like in some ways have expressed that resilience has been used kind of as a bat, like, oh, you're so resilient, so that means you can deal with anything. And so again, it's very nuanced how we need to talk about things because we want to help people build skills of resilience. How do you move forward through tough times and et cetera? But we don't want to say it's your job to be resilient. We want to help people to have tools and ways to be resilient. And one of the core messages that I am really hearing out of Black and Brown communities is that culture is a source of resilience. And that if we're not thinking about how we're doing our messages in the context of truly being connected to the cultures we're messaging to, then we're probably going to miss the boat. The second piece of our messaging is around help. And we really are saying there's not any one kind of help. We tend to focus a lot on provider systems, and we think that's very important. But we know that really to take on this public health crisis of suicide, we really need everyone to feel like they are equipped to provide the right help at the right time and at least know how to ask the questions and get people connected up to resources and support. And frankly, when you really talk with people who are struggling with suicidality, they'll often speak about the support they've received from a therapist, but what you'll really hear is the support they've received from their own social network. And so I really see part of our jobs working together is equipping everybody's social networks with ways of supporting one another. And then finally, we don't want to pretend suicide doesn't exist, but we do want to be really careful about how we talk about it and challenge what is really a prevailing narrative that suicide rates are out of control, that they went up in 2020. What we know from the actual data is that suicides in Oregon overall did not increase. It certainly did not increase for youth in 2020. And I did not include any of the data in this particular presentation, but I think it's incredible that the Oregon Health Authority over the last couple of years has started issuing a monthly data report that gives you real-time information about what's happening at our different lines that are answering phones, what's happening at our emergency rooms, et cetera. And you can sign up for either our listserv or sign up for the public health listserv on suicide and receive those updates every month to have the kind of latest real-time information. The other thing that we really want to focus on is that as we honor and think about people we've lost to suicide, we always want to do that hand in hand with work to do healing in the communities who are often so devastated after a loss like that. Next slide, please. I thought I'd take a pause to remind us that actually the Trauma-Informed Oregon and the Oregon Alliance to Prevent Suicide have developed some tools for folks to use when talking about suicide at public meetings. And I think that we're going to have many situations where we find ourselves in public meetings where we're talking about this topic. It could be anything from a school board meeting to a planning meeting for your coalition to talking at your local city council. And just a reminder that every time we talk about suicide, one of the hats that it's helpful for us to have on our heads is thinking about what is the impact of our conversation that we're having around suicide. So these are a few cues for you if you are in the position of facilitating one of those meetings or helping to plan one of those meetings. So just some cues are to be sure that you always have resources available where there's local connection, and also ways to link people to the helplines, including the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. A second key thing to remember is that it's not helpful to share details of what happened during a suicide or suicide attempt. That can actually be very triggering for people and increase risk of contagion. So while you never want to blunt the real pain and real tragedy that people go through, working with folks who are going to be talking about a suicide at a public meeting ahead of time can be really helpful to help teach people how to talk about the loss they've had in their life without kind of pulling people into a dramatic story that can actually cause more harm than help. Next slide. Really important point, this next one is get permission in advance from those involved before any disclosure from the person or a relative or anything else about suicide. You want to be sure that the people, that you're not outing somebody who may not be comfortable talking about this. So acknowledge the risk that their story could be repeated and help them to think through how to talk about it. Finally, as I sort of said at the beginning, realize that everyone involved, directly or indirectly with a suicide or attempt, experiences trauma, including guilt and shame. Focus your discussion on what was helpful to you and how a better functioning system might have helped you. Be mindful to avoid statements that single out individuals or entities and could be perceived as blaming. So a lot of our discussion today is really going to be focused around large campaigns, but these sets of kind of guidance are helpful not just in these large campaigns, but even in daily life and the smaller meetings that we're all in. And all of us who do this work together really are in a position to be advocates for working to be thoughtful in the way that we address suicide as we move forward. Next slide. Before we jump into thinking about messaging, I did just want to give folks a very brief update on our last legislative session. And most of you on here are very familiar with the Oregon Alliance to Prevent Suicide, but I do see a couple of new names. And welcome to those of you who are new, and good to see those of you who we've seen before. Just as a reminder, the Oregon Alliance to Prevent Suicide is an advisory council to the Oregon Health Authority on issues of youth suicide. We actively work to move policy and legislation forward to reduce youth suicide. And we also lean into some of the work around lifespan issues as well. And these are 6 key pieces of legislation that passed this last session. The first one we're very proud of. It's House Bill 2315. And that piece of legislation is going to require everybody in the behavioral health workforce to receive continuing education on suicide intervention, treatment, and management, something we think is an absolutely fundamental skill for anybody who's doing behavioral health work. House Bill 3037 essentially clarified some of the postvention, and remember, postvention is the word that we use for what a community does after a suicide. It clarified our legislation around that and the ways that medical examiners can actually report on deaths in real time to the Oregon Health Authority, which I think will help us across the state in terms of planning and responding in real time to situations. Another piece of legislation was House Bill 2381. That bill simply expanded the age group addressed through our statewide youth suicide intervention and prevention plan to include all school-age children going down to age 5. Because sadly, we are hearing more about attempts of youth under age 10. And also, we want to be sure that our statewide plan includes some strong upstream prevention strategies for young children. The fourth piece of legislation is related to notifying parents of risk if a youth is suicidal. And this is very nuanced legislation and a nuanced discussion because you always need to balance both the right and the urgent need for parents to know what's going on with their children, especially if they're at risk of suicide, along with the importance of being sure that youth and young people feel like they can have privacy and talk safely. So this is probably legislation we're all going to want to dig into more in the coming year to be sure that we're supporting effectively. And I'll just acknowledge that Roxanne Wilson, who was really the key advocate for this legislation, is on our call. So thank you, Roxanne, for that work. And I know she'll be working with us as we move this forward. House Bill 2417, it includes the beginnings of what I know will be more legislation to support the implementation of the new national 988 line, which will become the National Suicide Response Line and really the National Behavioral Health Crisis Response Line. A lot of the work that all of us are going to be doing in the next couple of years will be really thinking through how do we help stand up this new and really revolutionary system of responding to people in a mental health crisis. And then the final piece of legislation I want to point out is Senate Bill 52. And Senate Bill 52 was legislation that put into effect implementation of a plan to create affirming environments in schools for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, two-spirit youth. And oh my gosh, I lost track of the letters, and I am queer, so I apologize for that, for any of you who are in the IAs. But really, this is legislation that is pushing forward in schools. How do we create schools that are truly affirming places for all the youth that are there? And if any of you have been following the news, this has already come up as discussion in some school boards. And I think that as a community, we need to be thinking through how these discussions happen so that they create a sense of safety for youth rather than a sense of risk. If you're interested in learning more about any of these or being engaged with kind of finding out how these move forward for implementation, you can always reach out to us at the Alliance. We love getting you engaged with this work. Next slide. So with that, I'm going to pass the baton over to Jennifer Fraga, my colleague who works with me, to share a little bit about what our regional coalitions around the state are doing for Suicide Prevention Month? Jen?
I was saying amazing things and I was muted that whole time. I'm so sorry. That was awesome, strong stuff. Okay, let's start over again. So, like I just said, my name is Jen and I use she, her pronouns. And the Signs of Hope campaign is our first multi-coalition across the state campaign that we'll be doing this year. And as you can see on the map, the purplish areas, those are the counties and coalitions who are going to be participating this year. So as you can see, like we have a pretty like wide swath across the state, which is super exciting to be able to have this be like the first time that our coalitions are coming together and to have such great responses from folks to be able to participate. And as you can see in these pictures, this is just one example of something that coalitions will be doing on September 9th for the Signs of Hope campaign. And these are examples from Clackamas County. The Clackamas County Suicide Prevention Coalition did some Signs of Hope campaigns for the last couple of years where they just stood in different spots across Clackamas County and held signs. And these are the signs, the Don't Give Up signs that started in Newburgh. And we can provide you more information about those if you're interested in learning more. So a small group of, so we have our quarterly Regional Suicide Prevention Coalition Leadership Network meetings where just leaders from coalitions come together and talk about messaging and really work together and just helping each other with coalition work. And a small group of that subset came together earlier to create a media packet for just different organizations and coalitions that were interested in participating in our September 9th event. And that link I will be putting in the chat, but I will just quickly kind of pull it up. It's on our website. And so we have a handful of different media and outreach resources, one of which is our media packet. And so this packet link is now in the chat if y'all are interested in looking at it. And this is really just a basic, simple packet that gives folks, one, the details for the event if they're interested in participating, so how they can prepare. So again, that's Thursday, September 9th. It also gives folks an example of a press release if they're interested in connecting with their local media or just of any kinds of media and they want to talk about our event just to let people know what's going on. And then it also includes different ideas for getting the word out. So who they can connect with, how they can do things like on social media, connecting with local leaders, and then consider identifying a story of hope, help, or healing to share with their local media. It also goes into safe messaging, like Annette just talked about, because that is really important, as she was saying, when talking about suicide, especially on a large scale with the media or even just in holding signs and potentially talking with folks who come up to you. And then it gives information more about that from the National Action Alliance. Lastly, it also gives folks ideas for how they can participate. And I will also, so there's this, but I wanted to go more into what some of our coalitions are going to be doing. So if you're going to be participating in this event and your coalition isn't listed up on our slides, we'd love to hear what you're going to be doing, and you could put that in the chat if you want to share that with us. And some things that we know are going to be happening is Union County Suicide Prevention Response Coalition has already reached out to journalists. They're going to be holding signs in their main downtown area, and they're also putting together videos. The Suicide Prevention Coalition in Clackamas County is going to have a sign planting event September 1st, where they're going to, in their county behavioral health buildings, there's a huge area of grass where they're going to have just a sign planting of the Don't Give Up signs, so people can see those. They're also going to have sign holding days throughout the month, including September 9th. And then at the end of the month, they're going to, people are going to be able to come to that area and take home signs and put them wherever they would like. So whether that's on their neighbor's lawn or on their lawn or in a business, wherever that works, just to continue that hope spread throughout the year. Jackson County is going to have a sign, Jackson County Suicide Prevention Coalition is going to have a sign rally that's going to connect to suicide prevention and also the year anniversary of the fires that Jackson County experienced last year. So they're going to be connecting those Hope, Help, and Healing to both of those things. The Mid-Valley Suicide Prevention Coalition, which currently includes Marion and Polk counties, are going to be holding signs on September 9th, and volunteers will be wearing zero suicide shirts. And the coalition also connected with county media. Suicide Prevention of Lane County Coalition, they provided signs to individual coalition members who are going to be just kind of doing their own thing and how they can individualize their sign holding events, with one request for everybody that they take photographs of themselves doing these things, so that way those can be shared on social media. And so if you all happen to take pictures or just see a sign and you want to be able to take a photo of what's going on and you want that shared, we'd love for you to send it to us. I'll put my email in the chat so that way we can share it on both our listserv and our website. And then the Suicide Awareness and Prevention Council of Curry County has been working on some proclamations that and one of which the Curry County Commission approved a few days ago for Suicide Prevention Month. And while COVID is limiting in-person events, some signs may be shared across the county. I know that their current coalition chair, I believe is maybe her title, she ordered a pack of signs. So they may be, if they aren't able to hold them, then they'll probably have them placed in different areas throughout the county. So this is just, we're really, really excited for this event. It really came up because of one of our coalition leaders just started talking about how they thought it would be great if we could have shared messaging, because as we all know, when more than one group and more than one person is saying the same thing, the message is just louder and it's amplified. And the fact that it's going to be across the state, and then hopefully we'll be able to like share examples of what's going on. And then if we do those press releases for different folks across the state, it's really going to get the message out about hope, help, and healing, and just letting folks know that people are there and where they can go for resources and who they can talk to for help. So we're super excited. And with that, I will pass it back to Annette to introduce Donna. And if you have questions, put them in the chat. I'll also put my email in the chat too, so you can reach out if you'd like some help.
Thanks so much, Jen. And I'll just mention that I know that some of the coalitions are also ordering some blank signs for personalizing messages. Like one person said they want to have a message that says, "We've got your back," and "You're not alone." And so feel free to do that as well. And I would say this is part of why I think we went with this campaign so quickly, is we're just really aware of the level of kind of isolation and kind of sense of like disconnection people are feeling. And actually having visible somebody with a sign saying, "I care about you," is one way of visibly illustrating to people that we may all be looking through our individual screens separated in our houses, but we got you still. We're all still connected. And speaking of people who are connectors, I'm very happy to introduce Donna Harrell from Lines for Life and Bailey Simpson from Lines for Life, who are going to share with us a little bit about the campaign that Lines for Life is putting together for September. Donna.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for having me. Everyone can hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Want to go to the first slide, please?
Yes, let me just pull up your PowerPoint really quick.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much, Jen. Appreciate it so much. Okay, so this year, Lines for Life is really taking kind of a dramatic shift in how we're going to be communicating about Suicide Prevention Month. Just a little background, about 2 years ago when I started, I came to Dwight and was asking a little bit about equity, asking about like what happens on the call, on the lines, who's calling, are people of color calling, what are their issues? And we found that while we are doing a great job overall, we needed to kind of change our approach to how we're reaching different communities. So we realized that, and that our community outreach and model needed to change. So we then recognized that if we wanted to close that gap in racial disparities in mental health care, we needed to take the same approach in our relationship with communities of color. So our empowerment starts in the streets, at the local stores, at the barbershops within the neighborhood. So what we're going to share with you today is really a grassroots approach. We want people to start talking, and we know that there's a lot of stigma behind equity and race within mental health, and we're trying to break that down in a way that makes sense to this particular audience. So our campaign is called Mental Health Out Loud, and when I say that, I mean I want to make sure that everyone says mental health is okay to talk about. And this conversation is overdue. And we all know that equity and people of color have been left out of this conversation for years, and it's time for them to be in the forefront. So as Lines for Life presents Mental Health Out Loud, we want to highlight this cultural transformation that's happening. Due to George Floyd and all the things that have been happening around the country, this has become at the forefront of everything we see on CNN, on the news, everywhere. So Mental Health Out Loud prioritizes speaking up, telling someone what you're going through and reaching out for support when you need it. And we want everyone to join us as we spotlight real stories and examples of individuals and communities speaking up and putting their experiences on blast. So we encourage you to find your own way to engage with Mental Health Out Loud. If you typically keep things to yourself, consider telling one trusted person about something you're struggling with, or sharing one of the stories here with someone you care about to actually start that conversation. Because as we talk about things, we can begin to heal. Next slide, please. So just everybody knows the statistics, and OHA does a really good job of keeping us all engaged. Just a couple things I wanted to bring to your attention. Next slide, please. So overall, it's time to change our approach. So it's not only trying to reach communities of color, but how do we do that? So the typical way that we reach people through our communication strategy is not necessarily going to work with people of color. So overall, while in Oregon, we did see a decrease in suicide deaths in 2020, we know that so many Oregonians are experiencing stress and mental health distress. So we need to acknowledge this and also acknowledge the impact that suicide has on communities of color, which looks much different than what we're used to. Next slide, please. So the statistics tell the story. These are just some general things that I pulled out of countless number of pages I have on what's happening within communities of color. Research suggests that adult Black communities is 20% more likely to experience serious mental health problems. We know that Black youth, ages 8 to 15, is the fastest growing people they're experiencing suicide ideation. Only 33% of Latinos with mental illness receive treatment each year, and the average is about 43%. The stigma, the access to care, language barriers, and are just a few reasons why the disparity in mental health for this group happens. And again, for Native Americans, it is estimated that up to 70% of this population will suffer some sort of mental health disorder during their lifetime. The statistics are real. Part of our approach to this Suicide Prevention Month is to talk about these statistics, to get people engaged, to understand why this is so important to talk about. Next slide, please. So week one, it's all about it's time to get real. People in our communities are speaking out about their mental health struggles in ways we've never seen before. We've seen actors, rappers, athletes, and faith leaders all going public with their stories and offering support to others. There was an amazing story that we posted on our social media about Lil Wayne, who's a rapper, who discussed graphically about how his mental health has affected him and his attempted suicide. And it was something we wouldn't really show, but it shows you that this community is trying to help others understand and talk and break down those barriers. So that's week one. Week two, just next slide, please. So this is a graphic that we're going to be going with, and I'll tell you later on where you'll see this, but this is Mental Health Out Loud. It's time to get real. So it's basically showing you people are saying they're okay, but inside they're really wanting to scream out for help and support. So that's just one of our look and feels for this campaign. Next slide. The next week, look up and speak up. City lights shine purple and teal as a beacon across Oregon, reminding those who are struggling to speak up and ask for support. So we will have the Morrison Bridge will light up for the whole week, and it's supposed to be a beacon. I understand that the bridge is kind of a misnomer here, but the idea is just we're shining light on this issue. And then also the convention center for Suicide Prevention Day will be led up on 9/10. So we will be talking, having people take pictures. We will hopefully have news to actually show what this looks like. And basically, we've done this for years. And last year, of course, due to the fires, no one could see them. But this is something that we really want to use to bring attention to what we're trying to discuss and get out there. Next slide, please. And that's kind of what it's going to look like. Next slide, please. Week 3, when we speak, we heal. Personal stories about culture and mental health. Youth stories. I'm working with John Schrag, who's on this call, and he has some wonderful interns that are going to be coming into our youth line and talking to some of our youth about the stories that they're hearing on the lines and the way that it's affecting youth. Going back to school is a huge issue right now that we really need to talk about and help our families deal with. Families affected by the violence in the Black community. I don't know, we don't see it a lot, but there was a recent article that you're more likely if you're Black to die of violence in Portland than you are in any other state, including LA, Chicago, Atlanta. It's just not good. And so what are those families dealing with when they lose a loved one? Are they reaching out for help? Do they feel like they can? We are going to talk to some people that have been affected by this and why so much support is needed. We're going to have stories from providers and key partners. We work with a number of organizations focused on Spanish-speaking communities, Black communities, Asian and Pacific Islander. All of these providers and key partners have so much to share and so many resources that I don't see people getting or knowing that are available to them. We will have live Facebook events tailored toward communities of color, including all in Spanish. We have a Promotores program that we work with Providence, and we have people all over the world in Brazil, LA. There's about maybe 300 to 600 people on these Promotores, which is around mental health in Spanish in a way that resonates with that community specifically. We'll also have many blogs written by people with lived experience. What is it like being a first-generation student in high school with parents that don't speak English? In Hillsborough, for example, we hear these things all the time, and what Lines for Life is trying to do is not only bridge this during Suicide Prevention Month, but we've got to continuously be present so that we can help people navigate this thing we call mental health. Next slide, please. And here's another example of the campaign. It will be in English and Spanish. Next slide, please. And week 4, the conversation is overdue. Stories from the lines. What are we hearing? As you all know, Lines for Life runs around 30 lines, and we have youth line. We help everyone from youth up to people who are 55 plus. So we really do have the ability to see what's happening throughout a lifespan. So youth line collaborations with Pamplin Media and KGW, as I mentioned earlier. We have a racial equity support line that's run and answered by people who understand communities of color and how to approach that conversation. Culturally responsive approach to support. What does that communication look like? Usually we say, are you experiencing suicidation today? When you're speaking to a person of color, that approach would not work. That word suicide is too abrupt. Immediately, a person is going to say, I don't know, no. So we've got to figure out how to approach this in a way that earns trust and values what they're saying and what they're going through. And do communities of color call the line? How we are changing how we educate and engage with different communities, the language and approach, the trainings that we're having within our internal communities and with our internal call takers to really understand so that we can help people in the right way. Collaborations with Black providers and organizations. Again, we are going to be going into some of these different organizations and finding out exactly what's going on there and how we can help. Because right now, we've never done this before. We have never really gone out and said, Suicide Prevention Month for communities of color. So we're also going to be addressing stigma and trauma throughout the entire month as well. Next slide. It's just some more of our creative.
And one
Next
thing I want to
slide.
add to what Donna's saying before we get into media placement is that while we are going into communities of color to, and this is part of Lines for Life's overarching equity strategy, while we are going into communities of color to talk to them and coordinating with our staff of color to talk to them about their lived experiences, it is critical that we not only go into these communities just to get the story and leave, just to share their story on social media and then no longer have engagement. These are like long-standing relationships built on trust and respect and them willing to share their story with us rather than us going to them in a meeting for an interview. And having sustainable long-term relationships with these organizations and individuals as well. We don't want anybody to be in a situation where they give a very vulnerable experience to us and then we leave them. That's totally against everything that we do. And so what I would encourage anybody who's connecting with individuals or communities of color right now for Suicide Prevention Month is that it's a sustainable effort. And what Donna was saying too is what we're trying to do in addition to providing the narrative on their experiences is bring up Suicide Prevention Month in these communities, because historically they're not talking about Suicide Prevention Month like the larger demographic is. So yeah, just food for thought. Go for it, Donna.
Yeah, and I also forgot to mention that Lines for Life is rather new to this. Our CEO, Dwight Holton, has put 100%. This is a huge initiative for our organization. He's committed to it. We spend a lot of time on it. But rather than lead, Lines for Life, rather than lead, the most important thing is that we get these leaders and empower leaders to pursue mental health and wellness in their own communities. We've got to make sure that we tell one person tells someone else, and we train people within the community so they can help each other. Media placement, we're going to do a ton of social media, news media, community partnerships, and real stories, live video feeds. We're going to have some radio interviews on some Black focused radio stations, billboards, and a lot of blogs with real stories about real people in kind of the same realm as what we see in Breaking the Silence, really focusing on the issue and how to gain resources and help that is right for you. Next slide, please. Again, some more media posts. And these will be in different colors. We'll have different headlines, etc., as we go. We're going to definitely spend some time also on the military veteran families for 9/11 as well. And so also something that Anne brought up was when sharing these stories, we really need to reference support lines. So whether you use Lines for Life or other resources, it's always important to always tag something with an action item. If you need help, if someone you love is in crisis, please call one of these lines for support. So with that, I just really want to make sure that everyone understands that this is something that we have been working on for 2 years. We have spent time during our gala. We have done work with NSPL. We have done presentations with insurance companies across the country. People have called us about our approach to community outreach in communities of color. And one of the best things that we've been able to do is while I'm out in the community, I have earned the trust of many different people who have lived experience, who are mentors in their communities, who have now come to Lines for Life and have added so much value and so much to the conversation that it makes it real. It's not just people talking, but it's people who are there, people who have lost people with violence, people who are losing mentors, people that were on the road to changing their life, but then caught up in something else. So the violence and the issues that are facing communities of color, we've got to pay attention to. And mental health is the best way to start that, because in everything, the trauma that people have experienced really continue to make life really difficult in these communities. And that is all. Thank you so very much.
Oh, Donna, thank you. I have a quick question for you.
Yes.
Which is there, you shared a lot of resources. Do you have a hope that local coalitions and others will also be pushing some of the messaging out that Lines for Life is doing? What's kind of the best way for people to engage with the campaign?
Yes, and my team and I met yesterday, and so the look and feel that you see, we can actually we're planning on tagging or adding different partners to to our posts, tagging them, making sure that we're allowing them to use the creative. So we're going to actually build out a page where if you want to use this creative and put your own messaging within the creative, you can do that. So we will make those available. Also, some of the news I've sent out, I'm going to send out a press release. I think, Bailey, we're sending that out on Monday to encourage people to not only take this messaging and talk about it, and we have some wonderful people who are going to be interviewed by print and within on the news to talk about exactly what we're doing. So we will be, if anybody wants to use our creative, wants us to help them with this, we can absolutely do that. We're planning on sending out in an email with a link to our one of our SharePoint services so that you can pull those out. Also, if you would like us to help put your branding on them, we can do that as well. We also have a video that I couldn't show because this platform doesn't allow me to, but we're releasing an equity video that we did recently that is about a mural, and it tells the story through voices and art about how important equity is. And if anyone would like to use that in presentations, you can contact me and I will send that link out so everyone can take a look at that.
One of the most
Is it possible I could ask a question?
Yes. Is that Bob?
Hi, it's Bob Wise in Medford. Hey, Donna.
Hi, Bob.
So obviously we want to do anything we can to help you and Lines for Life. Can we help in creating a PSA? Would that be helpful for you at all? Because we're happy to do it.
I would love it, Bob. And I saw that Dwight answered you, so we are going to be on a call with you. We have intentions to call you for sure. You're on our list. Absolutely.
Well, we don't want you to forget about Southern Oregon ever, and we want to do anything we can to help.
Yes, and we definitely want to make sure that we are not just talking to people in Portland, we are talking about the state of Oregon. Absolutely.
Thank you.
And Bob, yes, I'm very glad you're here. I knew you were going to be here, and I'm very happy you have supported us a lot. So Dwight is on vacation, but we are calling you next week.
Nobody wants to talk to him anyway.
I know. Trust me. He told me to tell you hi.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bob.
Well,
Any of you have any questions, please feel free to email me. We have a lot of content. We have a lot of resources. We have a lot of, and what Bailey was saying, we don't just go into the community and leave, which is one of the reasons why I think we have a hard time. The media in Portland have a hard time really focusing on these stories because they can't just go into the community and then leave again. So if you do need resources, if you do need people to talk to, please call me, because I have a number of people that are happy to talk to you about what's actually happening on the ground, so you can get that viewpoint, not just from the newsroom, but actually from the community.
thanks, Dawn, and we'll send your contact information out for everyone at the end as well.
Great.
That's a great offer. And Bob, you just made this transition incredibly easy. Thank you. I am so excited to be hearing the panel that we're going to have now, and I think we'll have some opportunity for questions afterwards. I reached out to Carol Morton, who has reached out to me several times with questions about articles she's been writing. And I said, Carol, can you help me connect to people who could speak well about reporting on suicide prevention? And she connected me with Bob Wise and John Schrag. And I know that all three of these journalists have been real leaders in thinking through how can we do this messaging effectively, and are really committed. And so we have their titles up here, and I want to thank all of you journalists for being allies, and say one of the things I've been learning from you all is that you are regular, real humans as well as journalists. And I think sometimes that those of us who are doing this work on the ground can get a little intimidated by the idea of journalists. But I think the reality is that journalists are incredible and essential allies in this work. And so with that, Bob, I will pass the wand to you and ask you to share a little bit about your perspectives. And if folks have questions along the way, please put them in the chat so we can gather those.
Thank you very much, and I'm really happy that John is on this call. He's with us now. I think I see him out there. Hey, John, actually, I'm going to ask you a question in a second, because I had the pleasure to meet John in KGW studio a few years ago when we actually launched an education platform about suicide, and that I think led to Breaking the Silence and a number of other initiatives. But it goes back to education, and I'd ask John if he could just in a couple of words, the impact of what that education seminar meant to you and your reporting and your staff. You mind addressing that?
No, thanks so much. Can people hear me? I hope. Just a couple words. The word that comes to mind is it was transformational. I've been to so many journalism presentations where you get excited for a moment and then you get back to the office and the real world interrupts and you forget what you learned. This forum really changed the way that I think most newsrooms in Oregon looked at this topic, and we can get into that in some of the details. But I think what it struck for me was, what Annette said earlier is we can't pretend that suicide doesn't exist. And there were some newsrooms, including some part of our company, that actually were doing that. They were pretending that suicide did not exist in their communities and they were not covering them. And then on the other extreme, there were examples of journalists who were covering suicide in a way that was making the problem worse. And I think what we found in that meeting and where I met Bob was there's actually a way to do it right. And I think since that point, we've really made great strides in Oregon.
And I'm incredibly proud of the work I've seen you guys do, and as we are of our staff. But the reason I asked John that question is how important education is. And when I got to know Dwight Holton, he was our U.S. attorney, and he and I built a friendship, and then that led to where he is now, and my news director and I calling him and saying, listen, we've had some teen suicides here, and I don't know how the heck to deal with this, but we've got to do something, right? So that led to a number of different conversations, and the bottom line was we had to educate our journalists. I did a kind of a quick poll last night in our afternoon news meeting, and granted, we're a smaller market, we have a lot of young journalists, but I was curious if they had been taught anything about reporting on suicide while they were getting their degrees. And we're talking Syracuse, U of O, the Cronkite School at ASU. I mean, there's a pretty A list of journalism schools that these folks went to, and literally nothing. A little bit about mental health, but that means they rely on us to be able to help them. I think Kristen Fettig is on with us from Jackson County Health and Human Services, and she has been an amazing asset to us when we run into issues of how to report on something or if we should report on something. But the bottom line, it comes down to education. And, I've been a GM now for 25 years. I've been in media for 38 years. And thank you. I know I look younger. I appreciate you saying that. But the reality of it is that there's been no more important subject that we've ever dealt with. And so you layer that in over the work we've tried to do in the last few years with a program we initiated here called In This Together, which every day addresses the topic of mental health. And we've had support from Senator Wyden and Senator Merkley, then Congressman Walden, now Congressman Bentz, and a variety of community leaders to help understand what's going on in this world. And journalists want to know. They want to report this right. Journalists are smart people, and don't be intimidated by contacting them. One of the questions that was asked of me is, how do you get through the clutter? And meaning like to an assignment desk and get something reported on. There's a few things, and John might want to weigh on this too. It's, you really want to make sure that you have a compelling story, that you have several people that are available to talk about that story, and that you are constantly trying to reinforce the value of what this means, not to just you, but to the viewers or readers in general. And it's really not a hard process. As a matter of fact, later on, I can send something that we put together about how to write a media release that some of you might find helpful. And it was put together by our team that I think has some really good bullet points that could be helpful to you guys. But the bottom line is education. And I don't think there is a journalist that I've met that's worth their salt that doesn't want to be educated. we're honored to have a relationship with Lions for Life and with Kristen and her team at Jackson County Mental Health and Health and Human Services. And it's a subject that is changing. Through the past 18 months, not only did COVID impact, but then we had the fires here in Southern Oregon. There were a lot of really important issues that we had to hit head on. And I know that, we were asked to give maybe, and I wish I could show a video, but I'm going to urge you to go to our website and look at In This Together, which is a program we have here. And it encompasses a lot of PSAs that we've run every day and a lot of the news stories that we have put together and some that we're incredibly proud of. So with that, I look forward to answering any questions. We're, I think, here to help. I was really thrilled that John is on this call because I enjoyed meeting him at KGW and I've enjoyed watching the work that he's done. And I love the word he used, transformational. So thank you for having me.
Well, thank you, Bob. And I think we will have questions as we go along, but I think we'll take a moment to hear from Carol and then hear from John and then come back to questions. And I'm going to go ahead and post the link that you sent me, Bob, to that story so folks can go to that through the chat, but we will also, again, send that out afterwards. Whoops, I think I just sent it to one person. I'll send that to everyone. And Carol, I'll pass the baton to you.
Okay, thanks, Annette. So I am a freelance science journalist who participated in Breaking the Silence, the media collaboration. And Bob said that a lot of his young journalists hadn't had training in this, so I'm obviously not a young journalist, and I also haven't had training in this, even though I specialize in health and science reporting. So the training that John and Bob mentioned at KGW was very eye-opening with practical steps about reporting and writing suicide, and also kind of challenging to figure out how to write stories of hope and healing and do responsible suicide prevention reporting, and also do responsible journalism where you might be you might be finding out what's broken in the system and what needs to be fixed. And I found a solution. I found a framework for thinking about that in this thing called solutions journalism, which is where you're looking for people who have solutions and seeing how that's working in their communities and what kinds of problems it's solving and how those solutions would or wouldn't work in another community. And so I'm should have started a timer on my talk here. And I'm a freelance journalist, and I have been writing for the Oregonian I've been writing for the Oregonian because I've been able to get some grants and fellowships to pay for it. So I've been working on this for new to it, working on it for 3 years. Had the luxury of being able to start with questions, not starting with events like suicides in the community, but starting with questions like, what's happening? Why is this happening? And so people in this audience, and I've talked to a number of them, and I'm grateful for all the time that you've given me. I'll call up and just listen and ask these questions and listen to what's happening and try to figure out where the stories is and where I can make a difference in the story. And I'll give an example. When I first talked to Annette, she was very concerned about how I was going to be treating this topic. So she gently quizzed me on what I knew about the reporting on suicide guidelines, and I will post that link as soon as I'm done talking, to make sure that we were on the same page and treating the topic in the same in the same fashion. I guess I'll just stop now.
Thanks, Carol. I just want to ask about one thing. You talked about the difference of responding to an event versus kind of the long-term kind of research that you were doing. And I guess I'll direct this question to all three, to any of you, but it's, do you have some thoughts? Because sometimes communities, an event happens and suddenly there's just news. And do you have thoughts about how we as a community should be reaching out to journalists in those situations versus something like September Suicide Prevention Month, where we really have some kind of a planned campaign?
John,
I,
do you want to?
yeah, I think I can jump in. I think just a little reality check. Carol is an increasingly rare form of journalist, which is unfortunate. She is developing an expertise in a body of work. And while she says she's not an expert on suicide, she has a vast knowledge of healthcare, which is a great grounding in that. And she's also unusual in that she is working on long pieces that are not reacting to events. Most of what Bob and I do is reacting to events, and increasingly we're reacting to events with newsrooms that are pretty thinly staffed, and at least on the print side, staffed with people who are pretty inexperienced. And I think this is a real challenge for people in the healthcare community, and particularly those in mental health, because you're not going to be typically reaching someone with the experience of Bob or me or Carol. You're going to be reaching someone who is probably never written about a suicide before. And I think in those cases, you really need to just try to sort of, it sounds like, do what Annette did, is just sort of say, hey, I want to take a moment here and just sort of ask you, do you have any experience in covering these kinds of events? Are you aware of some best practices? And be aware that journalists are often resist being steered away from a story. And so our natural reaction when someone says, I caution you to go slow, is to go fast. And so covering suicide is very different, and it goes against much of what we've been trained. We've been trained to get the facts: who, what, where, when, and most important, why. And when we come to suicide, as Bob and I learned in that initial meeting, we really should usually stay away from why. And you just need to understand that if you reach a journalist who says, well, but wait, there's a suicide note. The police have released a suicide note. It seems like there was a major, heartbreak here. I feel that's important. It's going to be hard to convince a lot of journalists not to report that, and yet they shouldn't report that. So education, which we seem to be coming around to, is a huge, I think, opportunity and challenge for people on both sides of this equation.
Yeah, and John's 100% right. I see that Carol posted a Pointer.org reporting, editing dozens of Oregon media outlets, and it gives examples of smart journalism. It's a tough subject, and what we certainly do at the end, if we do a story, we vet it incredibly thoroughly, and boy, I really sound good on this call, don't I? Very thoroughly, to make sure that it's on point with the guidelines that you can find on a number of websites, including Lines for Life, of how to do it correctly. That always end with where to get help. I mean, the PSAs that we do, the news stories that we do, always end with, there's always somebody to talk to. If you're in a desperate situation, you always have somebody to reach out to. And I can't emphasize that enough in what we try to portray to our viewers here in Southern Oregon.
There's a question in the chat about what's the best resource to point people to around safe reporting. And I noticed there's a number of kind of safe reporting resources that got put into the chat, but just Justin was asking specifically about how to make that relevant at a local level when you're doing that messaging.
Go ahead, John.
I was going to say, journalists really like talking to people. And so I would say, in the Portland area, if I were to be, if someone were to ask me, I would say, hey, there's these real smart women over at Lines for Life, Donna and Bailey. Give them a call because they really want to help you. I think, in most markets, there's someone like that. And the other thing is, honestly, I think this group should take a look at the news organizations that are doing a good job, because I've been called by other reporters outside of our company because they say, hey, I understand you guys have had some experience in covering suicides. Can you tell me what you've learned? My gosh, if you're down in Southern Oregon and you talk to Bob and his crew, you got a great resource there. And I think journalists talking to journalists is really effective, because for Bob to tell someone, look, you ignore the suicide note. For me to tell someone, you really don't want to guess as to you really don't want to say that how this individual died by suicide. You don't want to use the method. And they'll, when they hear that from another journalist, we can enter a conversation. I think sometimes when they hear it from someone else, they're like, oh, here's another person trying to tell me to shut down the information flow. And, we want that. We actually want that knee-jerk reaction in our reporters. We want them to dig hard and fight for the right to publish information. This is a case where we need to tell them, put on the brakes. You actually can do more harm than good. And it's such an unusual message that I do think it often comes best when heard from another journalist.
Hey, can I say one quick thing? I just want to recognize that John and Bob and Carol have done such amazing work with Breaking the Silence. And it is a national program now. So we are working with the Alliance. We are working with huge corporations in the suicide arena to continue Breaking the Silence and make it a national program. So what we've started in Portland, driven by a lot by Bob and John, who I work with all the time, and Carol, I just want to recognize that Oregon has set the tone for really doing this. And so we have a lot to be proud of, but again, a lot to learn still as we work through how we're going to make sure we can actually help this situation.
Donna, those are really kind words, and I need to share with you that shortly before COVID, I presented a lot of the work that we're doing here in Southern Oregon to a group of broadcasters, 250 or so in Austin, Texas, and it was a variety of people talking about programs that they're doing inside their stations. We won Best of Show for the efforts that we've done here, and I got a lot of questions afterward about how could we do that or whatever. And here's the stigma part. Not one other station has done what we're doing. They thought it was amazing, but you got to have somebody that'll run point. You got to have a Kristen Fettig in your community, a Stacey Brubaker in your community, or somebody like Lines for Life that's engaged with the entire state. And tell you what, that's the beauty of Oregon, that we could we could grab our journalists together and sit in the studio at KGW and formulate a plan. Most states aren't like that. It made me incredibly proud of what's been accomplished here by John and his team, by Lines for Life. And Dwight and I are really close. And the work that Lines for Life does in this state it's hard to quantify the importance of it. But if you look at other states, it's even bigger, the great work that they've done. So I tell you that because getting over that stigma is the hardest thing for any television station to overcome. Why do I want to risk time on that when I can cover this and it's a heck of a lot easier?
Can you say a little more about what the fears, can you say more about what is going to get in the way of people reporting on it?
Scared of doing it wrong, I think.
Yeah.
And the stigma is going to be there. I mean, I've been around a long time, and thankfully I work for a company that does not mind going down that thread of mental illness that allows me to do the work that I love doing the most, and that's transformational kind of things for the viewers that we serve. And John is, I think I speak for him, the exact same way with his organization. But not all organizations think that way. They are more bottom line driven, and it's a touchy subject. It just really is. And I think that concern lives in a lot of broadcasters and or print organizations that they just shy away from it. And again, I'd be curious John's thoughts on that, because he may disagree, which is fine. But I think that stigma is hard for a lot of companies to overcome.
Yeah, I think the fear of doing something wrong, I think journalists know that there is a wrong way to cover suicide. I don't think they all know that there's a right way. And so it does help to work in a state where there are such resources. And you know, I'll do a little bragging ourselves. We had a story from 2020 that we did out of Clackamas County. A 9-year-old took his life, and the editor called me. He had been part of some suicide reporting, and we worked through it. And we actually were the head of the Clackamas County suicide prevention, who's on this call. She spent some time with the reporter and said, you know, there's a real danger here. Be careful what you're doing. And I think that really helped shape the story. And we put, in addition to the story, we put several resources. We did a story about why we're doing the story. And that won a national award, Suicide Awareness Voices of Education. And again, I think it was because most publications don't have that sophistication, and that sophistication came about because of the work Lines for Life did with that training.
You know, it really strikes me as I think about who's on this call with us in the audience, is that we've got people from all over the state who are in coalitions working to prevent suicide. And it sounds to me like developing relationships with your local media folks is really important. And you know, as you're talking about journalists being scared, as you talk, John, about journalists being worried about reporting it in the wrong way, knowing there's a wrong way, but not necessarily knowing there's a right way. I think that what I hear sometimes about reaching out to journalists is that folks are scared that they're going to have something, that they're going to say something wrong, that they're not going to get it right, and it's very worrisome. And I think it would be helpful just to hear a little bit about how do you develop a relationship with your local media folks?
It is really hard because you probably will have, you know, at most 1 or 2 conversations with a person, and instead of talking to people like Carol, who has this vast body of knowledge in healthcare, you're going to be talking to someone like Angel Rosas, who we hired a month ago, right out of college. He's never covered a suicide, so I think being candid is helpful. And then I think to establish the relationship, here's the thing, is that we get things wrong all the time. It's the nature of journalism to make mistakes, and we don't like to talk about it, but we are doing things so quickly that we will make mistakes no matter how hard we try. Most of the time, those mistakes do not impact people's lives. When covering suicide, they could. So my advice is, when you do have a journalist who has covered suicide in your community, find a reason to follow up with that journalist. If it was a total disaster, then you're going to have a very difficult conversation. But if it was generally a story that had some positive impact, start there. Journalists, as you learned, we are human. If you come out of the gate telling us what we did wrong, we're going to get defensive. If you come out of the gate saying, hey, I saw the story that you did about that young woman who died by suicide, thank you so much for highlighting that. I really appreciated the fact that you got the families. Find something positive to say. Then say, and I want to draw your attention to this. I don't know if you're aware, but generally my understanding is that we're trying to get away from the verb committed suicide, because I didn't know that until I went to this forum. And you can just sort of say, you know, we commit crimes, we commit sins. Suicide used to be both. It no longer is. So died by suicide is what most news outlets are using. And I just wanted to bring that point to your attention. That'll probably start a conversation. And if you get a journalist who says, wow, someone is making me a better journalist, they're not judging me, they're not coming down hard on me, they're helping me do my job better, then they're going to probably be very appreciative and may say, what else can I do? And then you can have that conversation. And in some cases, if the story's online, they can go back and fit it. I mean, and I got a call from someone from Lines for Life not too long ago. One of our stories used that phrase, committed suicide. It's just like, hey, John, heads up, saw this. We went back, we changed it. So, you know, that relationship is important. And I think, unfortunately, for a lot of you, it may not start until after the first story has been shared.
I can add one more. Oh, sorry, I can add one more thing. When you're talking to reporters, you can always volunteer to be available for fact checking if you have any follow-up questions. And usually journalism editors and producers prohibit journalists from sending a full story for review by a source, but they'll often let people can also call back and fact check if there's time, and a lot of people don't have the time for that. But if you're available and say I can and available to turn it around on tight deadlines, then that's something a source can do to do the most after the conversation.
Yeah, Carol, that's a great point. And I think what we forget that people don't know the unwritten rules of journalism, which is if you ask a reporter, hey, I'm assuming I can read that story before you post it online, the answer is going to be no, that's not a valid assumption. If you phrase it such as Carol said, I'd be happy to go by any passages or direct quotes that you want to run by me just for accuracy, that will get a much more positive response. And, you know, sometimes as I review things for accuracy, I end up reading the entire story. And it has the same purpose. But again, just sort of saying, hey, I'm here as a resource, not as someone who wants to shut down what you're doing. That makes a big difference.
One other thing I would add as an educational part of what our news director and I do is when a celebrity has taken their own life. So if you look at Kate Spade or Robin Williams, so many people want to write, here's how it happened. And that seems to be the biggest question of, you know, what did they do? How did they do it? And I mean, well-seasoned organizations will do it incorrectly because they haven't had the opportunity to be educated in the right way to do it. And I think the more we can educate our journalists and people on the ground that are in that world that know how hard it is to work in the world of suicide prevention, I will go back to what I started with. I think your local media wants to be educated and force feed them, send them, and especially if there is a celebrity suicide and you can give examples of, hey, this is how this should have really been said, a good news director will listen to that.
Well, this is all incredibly helpful and very practical, and I hope this is the beginning of the Oregon Alliance knowing the three of you. I mean, I've known Carol for a while, but I can hear the level of leadership you have and thinking you've done around this. The other thing I really take away from this is that I think we often focus on how do we get your attention? How do we get the journalists' attention? But it's not just about sending news out. It's also about following what is being reported on and giving feedback and connection. So it makes me even think that maybe coalitions want to think about having one or two people who agree that they're going to do that locally and really be kind of tracking what's happening in the news. So that's maybe something we can talk about as coalitions together. How can we be most effectively doing this work? Justin posted another comment up here, another question. Are most new journalists coming from training programs in Oregon, or are they from out of state?
Most of ours have come from out of state. We do have a couple from U of O, but we rely a lot on ASU's Cronkite School, Washington State, Syracuse, Missouri. You know, we're one of those training markets that the next step. Matter of fact, Christine Pitawanich is in Portland at KGW, and those that may know her as a reporter at KGW, her first 5 years were here, Syracuse grad, and she'll be on with Lester Holt tonight, which we're proud of her, talking about a story she did at OHSU. But they come from all over the place for us. John?
Yeah, I think what Justin's trying to get at is where's the funnel start? Where can we get this message at the beginning? And it's really hard. I think where you get the message is the newsrooms. I think trying to reach them in the academic setting is going to be hard. Not that you shouldn't try that, but I think we too draw from so many people. We hire a lot of people who don't come from traditional journalism backgrounds. So I think the way to train is in the newsrooms, and also try to get into the colleges.
Great. Well, this has been wonderful. Thank you to all three of you, and I hope we'll be in touch again. I'm going to transition us now to hearing a little bit from Roger about how Roger Brubaker in Lane County about a social media campaign that they're working on pushing forward, and some of kind of the real world challenges of doing that in a world with limited resources. So Carol, John, and Bob, again, thank you. I just really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you.
Hi, and yeah, thank you, Annette. Hey, I know we're running a little late, so I'll run through this for folks. And just as if anyone's interested in this topic further around journalism education specifically on these topics, the U of O's journalism program, Lori Shantz specifically, a professor of journalism there, she and I have worked over the years to educate incoming undergraduate journalism students on suicide prevention, uncovering suicides and homicides, actually. So if people are kind of curious about what that could look like at the post-secondary level, she would be a great person to talk to, and I'd be happy to discuss further. Okay, so I'm going to run through something real quick with you all about some information that we're working on with social media with the Suicide Prevention Coalition of Lane County. So I'm going to share my screen here real quick. And let's see, that's the wrong screen. Let's see if we can switch. Halfway there. Still wrong screen. Look at that. Let's see if we can switch again. Boom. All right, good. Okay. So just real quick. So again, for those of you who I haven't met before, Roger Brubaker, I live down here in Eugene. I work as the suicide prevention coordinator for Lane County Public Health. And I also act as a staff member on the Suicide Prevention Coalition of Lane County. We are a group, pre-pandemic, post-pandemic numbers are hard to pin down, as many people know, with groups like these. However, we are a group of people with lived experience of suicide and professionals working in a variety of different sectors on suicide prevention initiatives all throughout our county. And like I said, I am a government staff member that is attached to this group. However, it is a community-driven group. I'm going to talk a little bit real quick here about some work we're doing on social media and just trying to be kind of realistic about what our capacity is and trying to be thoughtful about what we're doing and why we're doing it. We just got a brand new logo. I think it looks pretty cool. I just wanted to share. All right, first question is, why are we doing this? Because we are inundated with PowerPoints these days. Let's put some iconic meme images in here if we're going to be talking about social media and online interactions. So why are we doing this? This is a really important question we need to ask when we're engaging with social media. I think it's a part of our lives, but if we're going to use it professionally or for the purposes of public health intervention, population level messaging, we need to be thinking about it quite differently than what we're posting on our phone, right? I have many questions that I want to ask when I'm engaging in social media, and here's just a few of them. Number one here, what can social messaging campaigns do? The research on social messaging, specifically online, is very mixed and very topic specific. There's a lot of great research around tobacco prevention, for example, and what can be done with social messaging campaigns, and what can be done with social messaging campaigns online. Around suicide prevention, though, the research is far more mixed. So we don't actually know the answers to all of these questions. Does this actually affect change in raising awareness in communities? Maybe. Does it educate people? Maybe. We can put out messages, but their impact is something quite different. Does it change attitudes? Again, mixed research on that as well. Does it change behavior? No research that I have been able to find demonstrates that that social media ends up having a great behavioral impact. That's for a number of reasons. The very nature of the research itself, and also just trying to think about, really at the end of the day, if we're trying to get people to do things different in the world with our words, as all the journalists were just sharing about their world, that's a hard thing to do. Okay, so some important trends to consider. This is Pew Research from 2018. This is actually already in the online world very dated information, unfortunately. But we do know this, that the majority of Americans do use Facebook, they do use YouTube, they do use different types of online and social media platforms. So if we're going to be trying to engage with the community, social media is a decent place to be. Who uses them and what demographics changes dramatically. What we do see is that youth, obviously, as many know, are going to be using, are not going to be using Facebook that much, are going to be using Instagram kind of, but even less these days, and are going to be more drawn to TikTok, YouTube, things like that. That becomes a big issue actually for implementation of a sustained, kind of more meaningful social media campaign, because YouTube and TikTok specifically are pretty labor-intensive platforms to get involved in, just because of the use of video. So anyway, we limited our work to just Facebook and Instagram. And this is an important question to ask, though. There is a lot of research on social media, but there is a really big question about implementation and what you do. And if anyone is even listening to you anyway, the metrics of social media can be bent and distorted in wonderful ways to show great outcomes. But truly sometimes local social media messaging, particularly if it's coming from an organization, is very hard to penetrate into new markets. And oftentimes what I see personally is a lot of organizations kind of talking with one another and swimming around in the same area, and we don't really get our messages out very often. So this is just the nature of the beast that we're working with. Okay, the objectives of our work within the Suicide Prevention Coalition of Lane County is to, at the outset, were to provide mental health promotion and suicide prevention messaging. So just that a nice kind of steady stream of positive information for the community, what they can do to prevent suicide, how they can care for their mental health, and how they can be involved in community efforts to care for mental health generally. Also, we want to use this as a platform to share our training and activities that our coalition does. We do a lot of QPR training that is actually facilitated by our coalition members. Our target populations, we've got about 380,000 people in Lane County. Based again on that Pew research, we know that roughly around 190,000 of them use social media of some kind. Again, I bet that this is from 2018, so it's probably even more now. Our other kind of our specific, we don't specify our populations too much yet, because we're just starting off, and so we need to kind of grease the wheels and build up our abilities. So our target population is just simply adults and youth, and like I said already, we kind of split that between different platforms. At the beginning, we had a big vision about what this could look like, but the pandemic is hard, and it has chipped away at our capacity, and understandably so. So at the beginning, we wanted to have all these different roles: platform administrators, content creators, platform monitors, to make sure that we could approve content, to make sure to adhere to safe messaging standards, that we could create and find new content to share, and that we could also monitor the interactions and engage with audiences in kind of more real time, right? That's the value of social media, is that engagement. However, the reality is much more difficult because we have lost our capacity, like I said. So this is where we are at right now. I'm going to stop this and go to our social media pages themselves. Just give you a quick little picture of what's going on here. So on our Facebook, this is our Facebook page. If you check us out here, we are at Suicide Prevent Lane Co. And so, like I said, we use it to promote our QPR. Oops, I am losing. Sorry about that. We use it to promote our trainings. We are using it to actually encourage people to join our campaign, the Signs of Hope campaign coming up. And then this is just a quick example. We are not creating any new content right now. We do not have the capacity to do so. We hope to in the future. So we're just really doing a thoughtful search and share of what's available online. We've linked our Facebook and Instagram so that they cross-post, and so a lot of the information you'll see comes across both platforms. We are starting to use our social media as an opportunity to start telling the world a little bit more about who we are. This picture is not loading because I'm presenting and it doesn't want to be nice to me. There's one though. So we have a series of, we are coalitions. We have a series of mission statements and goals and objectives, and we want to share them with the community. We share those on social media, and then as well, on our new website. And so we try to always be thinking about all of the different types of online platforms that we have to integrate and kind of keep directing people towards them and meet their needs. I was trying to go kind of quickly through that so that folks could see what we're working on, but that's kind of the reality of where we are at. We have, if you're going to do social media, you can do social media and we can put a lot of things out there, but the actual return on investment of time needs to be really considered because there's some really serious questions that we need to ask ourselves, essentially, just because of the real difficulties of market penetration in this day and age online, and the kind of the capacity of a group of individuals to do this kind of in a coherent, collective way, and that's just hard work. So this is where we're at. We are in the formative stages, and Annette asked me to share that, just to kind of share where we're at so far. So if anybody had any questions, they could connect with us here. Thanks.
Yeah, Roger, thank you so much for that. And I really want to keep authenticity in our webinars, because I know that folks from coalitions and organizations, you're all at really different stages of development. And you can hear Lines for Life is incredible. You can hear from them, and it can be kind of daunting because they've got an entire communication team. And so part of what I wanted Roger to share about was there are ways to begin to share messaging and push information out, even if you have few resources. And Roger, you just, as usual, did a just lovely job of kind of really drawing the picture for us of what that is like. We are at the end of our webinar this morning. I appreciate you all being here. If you didn't get your name into the chat, please add it, because we want to be sure that we've seen you. There's also a 3 to 4 question survey. It'll take you about 3 minutes to fill out if you're able to do that. And all of you, go forth, be good to each other. I hope you have lots of good hope and connections in your life. And we really appreciate the ways you're showing up in the world to make a difference for other folks. Take good care, all.